"You're being stupid, Olivia." Those 4 words echoed through the elegantly decorated living room of my in-laws' sprawling Connecticut estate. The casual conversations around us died instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence that made the crystal chandelier above seem to tremble. My husband's voice, usually so measured and controlled, had risen just enough to catch everyone's attention, just as he'd intended. "I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." I felt 30 pairs of eyes lock onto me, watching, judging, waiting for my response. My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass as I met my husband Andrew's gaze across the room. Behind his steel blue eyes, I caught the familiar flash of calculation. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a heated outburst. This was tactical. Next to him, my father-in-law Theodore Mitchell raised his eyebrows slightly, the ghost of a satisfied smile tugging at his lips. His wife Patricia adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit that always appeared when family drama threatened to disturb her perfectly orchestrated social events. 5 years of marriage, and it had come to this, my husband publicly undermining me in front of his entire family and their influential social circle, all because I had refused to sign away control of Horizon Solutions, the software company I'd built from nothing. But what Andrew and his family didn't realize was that I had anticipated this moment. I had prepared for it, and I wasn't about to back down. I squared my shoulders and took a deliberate sip of my wine, using those precious seconds to steady my voice. "I'm sorry, Andrew, but I didn't quite catch that," I said, my tone even but carrying enough edge to cut through the tension. "Would you mind repeating what you just called me in front of everyone?" The Mitchell family annual summer gathering was meant to be a celebration, at least on the surface. The immaculate gardens of the family estate were decked with string lights. Wealthy friends and business associates mingled on the perfectly manicured lawn, and waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Andrew's jaw tightened as he recognized the challenge in my voice. He hadn't expected me to push back, not here, not surrounded by the people whose approval had always meant everything to him. I said. He began, lowering his voice but ensuring it remained audible to those closest to us. "That you're being stupid about this whole situation. Stubborn and short-sighted." His father, Theodore, CEO of Mitchell Industries and patriarch of this dynasty of old money and new power, placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder. It was a gesture I'd seen countless times, part restraint, part solidarity. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion," Theodore said smoothly, his eyes scanning the room to assess how many witnesses were absorbing this unfolding drama. "I agree," I replied, setting down my wine glass on a nearby table with a deliberate clink. "But your son seems to think it's perfectly appropriate to call his wife stupid for refusing to hand over her company to Mitchell Industries' control. Patricia." Mitchell's fingers fluttered anxiously to her pearls again. "Olivia, darling, no one is trying to take anything from you," she said with practiced concern. "The merger would simply bring your little startup under the protection of a larger, more established company. It's for your own security." My little startup had revolutionized supply chain management software, secured 3 rounds of venture capital funding, and was currently valued at just over $75 million. The only thing Mitchell Industries wanted to protect was their ability to absorb my proprietary algorithms into their outdated systems. Andrew crossed the room toward me, his expensive Italian loafers silent against the Persian rug. When he reached me, he took my elbow in a grip that appeared affectionate to observers but felt like a vice. "Let's discuss this in private," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear, carrying the faint scent of the 25-year-old scotch his father had been pouring liberally all evening. "Why?" I asked, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You didn't think calling me stupid in private was necessary." He flinched, and I knew I'd scored a direct hit. Andrew Mitchell, with his Harvard MBA and impeccable pedigree, prized nothing, more than his polished image. 5 years ago, when we'd met at a tech conference where I was showcasing my early prototype and he was representing his father's company, that confidence had been magnetic. Now I recognized it for what it was, the automatic entitlement of someone who had never been told no and meant it. "You're embarrassing yourself," he hissed, his smile fixed in place for the benefit of onlookers. "No, Andrew, you embarrassed me when you tried to pressure me into signing over controlling interest in my company to your father's conglomerate," I replied. "And now you're insulting me because I refused." Theodore Mitchell cleared his throat and stepped forward, every inch the corporate mediator. At 62, he maintained the physique of a man who considered physical fitness another measure of success and control. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his custom suit perfectly tailored to conceal the ruthlessness that had built Mitchell Industries into the juggernaut it had become. "I think we're all a bit tense tonight," he announced to the circle of uncomfortable guests who were pretending not to eavesdrop. "Business discussions can become passionate, especially among family. Why don't we enjoy this beautiful evening and save shop talk for Monday?" His attempt to defuse the situation might have worked if Andrew's cousin Megan hadn't chosen that moment to approach, her curiosity overriding family discretion. "What's this about Olivia's company?" she asked, glass of champagne in hand. "I heard Mitchell Industries was acquiring it. Isn't that exciting?" The silence that followed her innocent question was deafening. Andrew's face flushed, Theodore's expression hardened, and Patricia seemed to physically wilt. "There is no acquisition, Megan," I said calmly. "Mitchell Industries made an offer and I declined it." Andrew's cousin looked genuinely confused. "But Uncle Theo announced it at the board meeting last week. They even issued a press statement draft." "Megan, that's enough," Theodore cut in sharply. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had been so confident I would give in that they'd already begun announcing the acquisition internally. The pressure campaign of the past 3 months, Andrew's sudden interest in my company's finances, his insistence that I was working too hard, the casual mentions of how Mitchell Industries could lighten my load, hadn't been a concern. It had been a coordinated strategy. I reached for my purse, which hung on the back of a nearby chair, and extracted my phone. "What are you doing?" Andrew demanded, watching as I quickly navigated through screens. "Checking something," I said, pulling up the business news sites I monitored daily. Nothing about an acquisition had been publicly announced, but if they'd drafted a press release— "Put that away," Andrew said, reaching for my phone. "This isn't the time or place." I moved my hand just beyond his reach. "When would be the right time, Andrew? After the announcement you apparently already prepared? Or after your father's lawyers found a way to enforce those documents you've been leaving casually around our home office for me to sign?" The slight widening of his eyes confirmed my suspicion. Those seemingly innocuous papers about restructuring our personal assets for tax purposes that had appeared on my desk last week, I'd been right not to sign them without having my own attorney review them first. Patricia Mitchell stepped forward, social damage control clearly her priority. "Perhaps we should serve dessert in the garden," she suggested to no one in particular. "The evening is so lovely, and Olivia's favorite chocolate souffle is just about ready." "I've lost my appetite," I said, slipping my phone back into my purse. "And I think I should leave." Andrew's hand caught my wrist. "Don't make a scene," he warned quietly. "I'm not the one who called my spouse stupid in front of 30 people, I replied, keeping my voice low but firm. "Let go of my wrist, Andrew." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The same expression I'd glimpsed a handful of times over our marriage when things hadn't gone exactly as he planned. But awareness of our audience prevailed, and he released me, his fingers leaving faint red marks on my skin. "Fine," he said, straightening his custom-tailored jacket. "I'll drive you home." "That won't be necessary," I replied. "I brought my own car." This wasn't entirely true. We had arrived together in his Tesla, but I'd had enough foresight to arrange a rideshare that was currently waiting just outside the property gates. After the increased pressure of recent weeks, I'd started making contingency plans. Theodore stepped closer, lowering his voice for only the three of us to hear. "Olivia, you're upset, and understandably so. But decisions made in anger are rarely a sound business strategy. Why don't you take the weekend to reconsider our offer? I'm sure by Monday, cooler heads will prevail." His tone was reasonable, his expression concerned, but the implicit threat was clear. The Mitchell family didn't accept rejection, not in business, and certainly not from someone they considered an outsider who had married into their world. "My decision isn't based on emotion, Theodore," I said. "Horizon Solutions isn't for sale, not to Mitchell Industries or anyone else. The company is my creation, built on my algorithms and my vision. I'm not giving that up." Patricia touched her husband's arm in warning as she noticed several guests drifting closer, drawn by the obvious tension. "Let's not bore everyone with business talk," she said with forced brightness. "Olivia, before you go, won't you at least try the dessert? Chef Marceau has outdone himself. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off." The surreal quality of the moment struck me. My in-laws were more concerned about maintaining appearances than addressing the fact that their son had just publicly insulted me. But that had always been the Mitchell way. Appearances first, reality a distant second. "Another time," I said, gathering my remaining composure. I turned to the assembled guests, many of whom were watching with barely concealed fascination. "I'm afraid I need to leave early. Please enjoy the rest of the evening." As I moved toward the door, I felt Andrew close behind me. When we reached the grand foyer, safely out of earshot of the party, he gripped my elbow again. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his carefully controlled facade cracking. "Do you have any idea how important this deal is to my father? To our future?" "Our future," I repeated, pulling my arm free. "You mean your future at Mitchell Industries. This has nothing to do with what's best for me or for Horizon." "Don't be naive," he snapped. "Your company has reached its peak. Without Mitchell Industries' resources and connections, you'll hit a ceiling. My father is offering you a generous exit. Take it." I studied my husband's face, searching for any trace of the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who had once admired my ambition, who had cheered when I secured my first major client, who had brought champagne to my tiny office when my patent was approved. That man had disappeared so gradually I hadn't noticed his replacement, someone who viewed my success as a stepping stone for his own advancement within his father's company. "This isn't about business, is it?" I asked softly. "This is about control. Your father promised you something if you delivered my company, didn't he? What was it, Andrew? A seat on the executive board? The COO position you've been coveting?" The flash of surprise in his eyes told me I'd hit close to the mark. "You don't understand how things work at this level," he said dismissively. "Sometimes strategic sacrifices are necessary for the greater good." "And I'm supposed to be the sacrifice?" I asked, anger finally seeping into my voice. "The little woman who hands over her life's work so her husband can climb another rung on the corporate ladder?" Andrew ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "You're being dramatic. We're offering you a generous compensation package, a consulting position, and a pat on the head for being a good girl who knows her place?" I finished for him. "No, thank you." I moved toward the massive front door, but Andrew stepped, in front of me blocking my path. "If you walk out that door, you're making a serious mistake," he warned. "My father doesn't take rejection well, especially not in front of his friends and colleagues. There will be consequences." The implied threat hung in the air between us. I had witnessed the Mitchell approach to business obstacles over the years. The strategic lawsuits, the quiet word in the right ear that dried up funding, the the sudden regulatory scrutiny that befell competitors who didn't fall in line. "Are you threatening me, Andrew?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the anger and hurt churning inside me. "I'm trying to protect you," he insisted, though his eyes told a different story. "My father has resources and connections you can't imagine. Don't make an enemy of him, of us, over stubborn pride." In that moment, everything became crystalline in its clarity. The past 3 months of increasing pressure, the subtle and not-so-subtle attempts to access my company's financial records, Andrew's sudden interest in my intellectual property protections. They hadn't been coincidences or expressions of genuine interest. They had been reconnaissance. "I need to go," I said, sidestepping him to reach the door. "Olivia, don't—" "Good night, Andrew." I cut him off, pulling open the heavy oak door. "I think we both need some time to consider what happened here tonight." Outside, the summer evening was warm and fragrant with carefully cultivated roses from Patricia's prized garden. I walked swiftly down the circular driveway, past the line of luxury vehicles belonging to the Mitchell family's guests, focused on reaching the security gate before Andrew could follow me. As I approached the gate, I pulled out my phone and confirmed that my rideshare was waiting. The security guard, who had known me for years, gave me a concerned look. "Everything all right, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked, buzzing open the pedestrian gate. "Just fine, Carl," I replied with a smile I didn't feel. I needed some fresh air. Once outside the gates, I slid into the waiting car, giving the driver the address of the Whitley Hotel in downtown Boston rather than my home address. As the car pulled away from the Mitchell estate, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just happened. My husband had publicly humiliated me to pressure me into signing away my company. My in-laws had apparently already begun announcing an acquisition that I had repeatedly refused, and now, by standing my ground, I had likely made powerful enemies of the entire Mitchell family. But what they didn't know, what Andrew, for all his calculated maneuvering, had failed to discover, was that I wasn't as vulnerable as they believed. In the 3 months since Theodore Mitchell had first approached me with his generous offer to acquire Horizon Solutions, I had been quietly preparing for exactly this scenario. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone again and opened my secure messaging app. The recipient was listed only as R.S., my former college roommate Rachel Sullivan, now one of the top technology attorneys in Boston. 3 weeks ago, I had asked her to prepare for a worst-case scenario. Now it appeared that scenario had arrived. My message was simple. It's time. Meeting at the Whitley, Suite 2010 in 30 minutes. Her response came almost immediately. "On my way, bringing the contingency files." I leaned back against the car's leather seat, watching the Mitchell estate recede in the distance. The night had not gone as planned, but perhaps that was for the best. The masks had finally dropped, revealing the true nature of my marriage and my in-laws' intentions. Tomorrow would bring challenges I could only begin to anticipate. But tonight, as I headed toward a hotel suite where Rachel would be waiting with the legal protections and strategic countermeasures we had prepared, I felt something unexpected beneath the hurt and anger. Relief. The game the Mitchells thought they were playing had just changed fundamentally. They believed they were dealing with an isolated woman who could be pressured and manipulated into surrender. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The Whitley Hotel had always represented a particular kind of old-world Boston elegance, discreet luxury that whispered rather than shouted. As I sat in the plush armchair by the window of Suite 2010, waiting for Rachel to arrive, my mind drifted back to the first time I'd met Andrew Mitchell. It wasn't at the Whitley, but at another venue of understated prestige, the annual Boston Innovation Summit 5 years ago. I'd scraped together every last penny to secure a small exhibition booth for my fledgling startup, Horizon Solutions. Back then, it wasn't even called Horizon yet, just Supply Chain Optimization Algorithm. an unglamorous name for what I believed could revolutionize how companies manage their logistics. My booth was wedged between a flashy cryptocurrency platform that had hired models to attract attention and a robotic pet toy company whose demonstrations constantly malfunctioned. I had nothing but my laptop, a simple poster board with flowcharts, and unshakable belief in my algorithm's potential. "Your throughput projections can't possibly be accurate," a voice had said, startling me as I adjusted my display for the 100th time. I looked up to find a man in his early 30s studying my demonstration screen with skeptical intensity. Even before he introduced himself, I knew he was someone important. The tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire year's rent, the confident stance of someone accustomed to being heard, the subtle Patek Philippe watch that peeked from beneath his cuff. "They're not just projections," I'd responded, straightening to my full height, which still left me looking up at him. "They're results from 3 pilot implementations." His eyebrows had risen slightly. "3 companies actually implemented your unproven system." "Small companies," I admitted. "Local distributors willing to try something new in exchange for heavily discounted rates, but the efficiency improvements are consistent across all 3 test cases." He'd studied me then, reassessing. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward my laptop. For the next 20 minutes, Andrew Mitchell, though I didn't yet know that was his name, had drilled me with increasingly technical questions about my algorithm. Where most visitors to my humble booth had glazed over when I mentioned mathematical optimization and predictive analytics, he followed every nuance, challenged my assumptions, and even suggested refinements that showed genuine insight. "Who are you?" I'd finally asked, both impressed and slightly unsettled by his understanding of my work. "Andrew Mitchell," he'd said, extending his hand. "Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Mitchell Industries." Even then, with my limited experience in the Boston business world, I'd recognized the name. Mitchell Industries was one of the largest privately held conglomerates in New England, with tentacles in everything from manufacturing to finance to technology. "Olivia Reed," I'd replied, shaking his hand. "Founder and currently sole employee of, well, this." He'd smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Your algorithm has potential, Olivia." "Reed, much more than most of what I've seen today." "Thank you," I'd said, wary but pleased. "But if you're scouting for acquisitions, I should tell you up front that my company isn't for sale." His laugh had been unexpected and disarming. "Always negotiate from a position of strength, even when you don't have one." I like that. Before leaving my booth, he'd handed me his business card, heavy cardstock with embossed lettering, nothing like the budget prints I'd ordered online. "I'm not looking to acquire your algorithm," he'd said. "At least, not today. But I'd like to hear more about it. Perhaps over dinner?" That dinner had turned into another and another. As our relationship evolved from professional interest to personal connection, I'd been captivated by the duality of Andrew Mitchell. In business settings, he was razor sharp, sometimes ruthless, a perfect product of the Mitchell dynasty. But privately, he showed me a different side. A man who could spend hours discussing the ethical implications of AI, who kept a dog-eared copy of Thoreau's Walden on his nightstand, who once flew us to Chicago just because I'd mentioned missing their deep dish pizza. A knock at the hotel room door pulled me back to the present. Rachel Sullivan entered with the brisk efficiency that had made her one of Boston's most sought-after technology attorneys. Her curly red hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the late hour, she looked alert and focused. "I brought everything," she said, placing her leather briefcase on the desk. "Articles of incorporation, shareholder agreements, intellectual property documentation, the trust paperwork, and those contingency filings we prepared." Rachel had been skeptical when I'd first approached her 3 weeks ago. concerned I was overreacting to normal acquisition pressure. But she'd listened as I detailed the pattern of behavior. Andrew's increasingly insistent questions about my company structure, the mysterious calls from my bank about verification requests on my business accounts, the sudden interest from Mitchell Industries' legal department in my intellectual property protections. "So it finally happened," Rachel said, sitting across from me. "They made their move." "Not exactly how I expected," I admitted, recounting the events at the Mitchell estate. "I thought they'd try something more subtle. Legal pressure, perhaps, or financial manipulation. Not Andrew publicly calling me stupid at a family gathering." Rachel's expression hardened. "Classic intimidation tactic. Make you feel small. Question your judgment. Undermine your confidence. Also, you'll doubt your decision to refuse them." She began organizing documents on the coffee table between us, creating neat stacks with practiced precision. "The irony," I said quietly, "is that if they'd approached this differently, as partners rather than predators, I might have considered some form of collaboration." It was true. In the early days of my relationship with Andrew, I'd been impressed by Mitchell Industries' resources and reach. Theodore Mitchell had built a business empire through a combination of strategic acquisitions and ruthless efficiency, optimization, exactly the world where my supply chain algorithm could shine. When Andrew had first introduced me to his father, at another elegant dinner at the Whitley, I'd been nervous but excited. Theodore had been cordial, if reserved, asking pointed questions about my background and education. "University of Massachusetts," he'd repeated when I'd told him where I'd earned my computer science degree. "Not MIT or Harvard?" "Full scholarship. To UMass," I replied. My single mother couldn't have afforded the others, even with financial aid. His slight nod had acknowledged the information without truly accepting it. Throughout that dinner, I'd felt him evaluating me, measuring my worth not just as his son's girlfriend, but as a potential asset, or liability, to the Mitchell name. Patricia Mitchell had been more openly concerned about my pedigree. During our third meeting, she'd casually inquired about my people, a thinly veiled attempt to determine if I came from money or connections that might offset my public university education and middle-class upbringing. "My people are hardworking Midwest transplants," I'd answered honestly. "My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 8. She worked 2 jobs to make sure I had opportunities she never did." Patricia had sipped her wine and murmured something about how refreshingly diverse Andrew's social circle had become. The comment had stung, but Andrew had squeezed my hand under the table in silent support. That was the Andrew I'd fallen in love with. The man who seemed to value me for exactly who I was, who appeared excited by my ambition rather than threatened by it. When he'd proposed 18 months after we met, presenting a family heirloom ring that had belonged to his grandmother, I'd believed we were forging a partnership of equals. Our wedding had been an exercise in compromise. The Mitchell family's desire for a society event tempered by my preference for intimacy and meaning. Andrew had supported most of my choices, though I'd later realized this was largely because I'd yielded on the guests his parents insisted upon. Boston's business elite, political connections, and old money families whose names appeared on buildings and endowments. The early years of our marriage had coincided with Horizon Solutions' first significant growth phase. My algorithm had caught the attention of several mid-sized manufacturing companies, and the success stories had begun to spread. I'd hired my first employees, moved into proper office space, and secured a small but significant round of seed funding. Andrew had celebrated these milestones with me, opening champagne when I signed my first 6-figure contract, listening attentively when I described technical challenges, even connecting me with potential clients from his own business network. "You saw no warning signs?" Rachel asked, interrupting my thoughts as she reviewed a document. "No indication that the Mitchells viewed your company as something to be acquired rather than supported?" I considered her question carefully. There were moments. Comments from Theodore about how my company might fit into the Mitchell portfolio someday. Questions from Andrew about my long-term vision that, in retrospect, seemed focused on exit strategies rather than growth paths. 13 months ago, Horizon Solutions had reached a critical inflection point. My algorithm, now expanded into a comprehensive supply chain management platform, had attracted attention from several major corporations. Suddenly, I was fielding calls from Fortune 500 companies interested in implementation, venture capitalists eager to fund expansion, and yes, potential acquirers exploring purchase opportunities. That was when I'd begun to notice the shift in Andrew. His enthusiasm for my success had developed a subtle edge. Congratulations followed by questions about valuation, celebrations tempered with comments about optimal timing for exit. Real change came after the Forbes profile, I told Rachel, referring to the business magazine's feature on tech innovators transforming traditional industries that had included Horizon Solutions. Suddenly, I wasn't just Andrew's wife with a promising startup. I was a recognized industry innovator in my own right. The morning the article was published online, I'd woken to find Andrew already awake, reading it on his tablet. His congratulations had seemed genuine, but later that day he'd called to say his father wanted to meet for dinner. Just the three of us. That dinner, at Theodore's private club in downtown Boston, had marked the beginning of the pressure campaign. "Olivia," Theodore had said after preliminary pleasantries had been exchanged, "I've been following Horizon's progress with great interest. Your growth trajectory is impressive." "Thank you," I'd replied, warmed by the rare compliment from my father-in-law. "Which is why I think it's time we discussed bringing Horizon under the Mitchell Industries umbrella." The statement had been delivered casually, as if we were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Andrew had watched me carefully, his expression neutral but expectant. "I'm not looking to sell, Theodore," I'd responded, keeping my tone light. "We're just hitting our stride." "Not selling," Theodore had corrected. "Merging, becoming part of something larger, with the resources to scale your technology properly." The conversation that followed had been a masterclass in corporate pressure tactics. Theodore had outlined all the ways Mitchell Industries could enhance Horizon's growth, distribution channels, client introductions, engineering resources. Andrew had chimed in with points about synergistic opportunities and vertical integration benefits. When I'd maintained my position, grateful but uninterested in acquisition, Theodore's demeanor had cooled perceptibly. "Consider it carefully, Olivia," he'd said as we parted that evening. "These opportunities have limited windows." In the months that followed, the Mitchell approach had evolved from persuasion to persistence to something closer to persecution. Weekly check-ins from Theodore. Helpful suggestions from Mitchell Industries' legal team about my company structure. Andrew's increasing insistence that I was working too hard and should consider the life flexibility that would come with selling to his father. 3 months ago, the pressure had intensified again when Horizon secured its Series B funding round, $28 million from venture capitalists who valued the company at $75 million. The investment had made headlines in Boston business circles and triggered Theodore's most aggressive acquisition attempt yet. "Dad's preparing an offer," Andrew had told me one evening as we were getting ready for bed. $90 million full cash buyout, generous retention packages for your key team members, consulting contract for you with significant autonomy. The number had been impressive, I had to admit. More money than I'd ever imagined having. But something, in Andrew's tone, the certainty that I would accept, the absence of any question about my interest, had troubled me deeply. "And if I'm not interested in selling?" I'd asked. Andrew had paused in the act of removing his tie, genuine surprise crossing his features. "Why wouldn't you be? It's an exceptional offer, well above market valuation." "Because Horizon is my creation," I'd explained. "My vision, my algorithm, my team. I'm not finished building it yet." His expression had shifted then, from surprise to something harder to read. Calculation, perhaps, or disappointment. Everyone sells eventually, Olivia. That's how the game works. You build something valuable enough that someone bigger wants to buy it. That's not why I built Horizon, I'd countered. I didn't create it just to sell it to the highest bidder. The conversation had deteriorated from there, with Andrew becoming increasingly frustrated by what he termed my idealistic naivety. It was the first serious argument we'd had about my company, but far from the last. In retrospect, I told Rachel as she organized the contingency paperwork we'd prepared, I should have recognized the pattern sooner. The increased interest in my company's financial details, the casual suggestions about protecting our future by consolidating assets, the not-so-subtle comments from Theodore about competitors who had resisted Mitchell acquisitions only to face unexpected challenges afterward. Rachel nodded grimly. Classic corporate predator behavior. They identify a target, apply pressure, from multiple angles, and wait for capitulation. I just never thought Andrew would be part of it, I said quietly. The pain of this realization still fresh, not against me. Family businesses can create divided loyalties, Rachel observed, her tone softening slightly. The question is, where does Andrew's ultimate loyalty lie? With you or with the Mitchell dynasty? After tonight's public humiliation, that question seemed painfully answered. As Rachel continued organizing our defensive strategy, I found myself mentally retracing the path that had led to this moment of crisis. There had been so many small warnings I'd dismissed or rationalized. Andrew's growing defensiveness when I questioned Mitchell Industries' business practices, his increasing alignment with his father's views, his subtle attempts to access Horizon's proprietary information, just out of interest. The most significant red flag had appeared just 5 weeks ago, when I'd returned unexpectedly from a canceled client meeting to find Andrew in my home office, using my personal laptop. He'd claimed he was checking email while his device charged, but the flash of guilt in his eyes had told a different story. That night, I'd performed a security audit of my system and discovered traces of a sophisticated file scanning program. When confronted, Andrew had dismissed it as standard security software that must have been installed during a system update. The discovery had shaken me profoundly. It represented not just a potential corporate espionage attempt, but a fundamental breach of trust in our marriage. That weekend, I'd reached out to Rachel, initially just for legal advice about protecting Horizon's intellectual property. Her questions had led me to see the pattern more clearly, and together we'd developed the contingency plan now spread across the hotel room coffee table. "I'm ready when you are," Rachel said, finishing her organization of the documents. "The emergency board meeting is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. The security protocols have been implemented. The trust documentation is complete. All we need now is your final decision on how to proceed." I looked out the window at the Boston skyline, lights twinkling against the night sky. Somewhere across the city was the penthouse Andrew and I shared, the home I had thought we were building together, but which now felt like just another Mitchell acquisition. "I never wanted it to come to this," I said softly. "I know," Rachel replied, "but they've forced your hand." She was right. Tonight's public humiliation had merely been the culmination of a campaign that had been building for months. Andrew's cruel words, "You're being stupid, Olivia," had simply exposed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. To the Mitchells, I was not family. I was an asset to be acquired or an obstacle to be removed. "Okay," I said, turning back to Rachel with newfound resolve. "Let's implement the full contingency plan. All security protocols, all legal safeguards. They wanted a battle? They've got one." Rachel nodded, a hint of fierce approval in her eyes. "The Mitchells think they know what they're dealing with, a talented but isolated woman they can pressure into surrender. By this time tomorrow, they'll discover how wrong they were." As I studied the defensive strategy we'd prepared, I felt a strange sense of clarity cutting through the pain and betrayal. The Mitchells had underestimated me, my resilience, my foresight, and most of all, my determination to protect what I had built. They were about to learn a costly lesson. I was not the vulnerable target they had assumed me to be. Sleep eluded me that night in the Whitley Hotel's comfortable suite. Rachel had left shortly after midnight, promising to return at 6:30 a.m. to accompany me to Horizon's offices for the emergency board meeting. As I lay in the darkened room, my phone vibrates repeatedly with incoming calls and messages from Andrew, each one ignored. At 3:17 a.m., a different notification appeared, a text from Emma Chen, Horizon's Chief Technology Officer and my first hire 3 years ago. Security alert triggered at the office. Remote access attempt from unauthorized IP. Protocols engaged. All systems are secure. Call when you can. I sat up, immediately alert. This wasn't a coincidence. The Mitchells were making their move sooner than expected. I called Emma, who answered on the first ring despite the hour. "Someone's trying to access our development servers," she explained without preamble. "Sophisticated attempt. They're routing through multiple VPNs, but the signature matches that penetration testing we did last month." "Mitchell Industries," I said, not really a question. "Can't prove it yet, but the pattern fits the profile," Emma confirmed. "Our enhanced security measures are holding. Honeypot systems are tracking their movements. We're gathering evidence, without them realizing they're being monitored." I felt a cold anger building beneath my fatigue. "Keep me updated on any developments. And Emma, thank you for being vigilant." "Always," she replied simply before disconnecting. 3 weeks ago, when I'd first begun to suspect the Mitchells might attempt something drastic, I'd implemented enhanced security protocols across Horizon systems. Emma had been skeptical initially. She knew I was married to Mitchell, but wasn't privy to the growing tensions in my marriage. When I'd explained my concerns about potential corporate espionage without naming specific threats, she'd quickly developed a comprehensive security strategy that would not only protect our systems, but capture evidence of any intrusion attempts. Now, that strategy is proving its worth. I sent a quick update to Rachel, then tried again to sleep, knowing the coming day would demand every ounce of mental clarity I could muster. Morning arrived in a wash of golden light through the hotel room's east-facing windows. I showered and dressed in the spare outfit I'd packed in my emergency bag, a tailored navy suit that projected the authority I needed to feel. When Rachel arrived at precisely 6:30, I was already reviewing security updates from Emma and preparing talking points for the board meeting. "Productive night," Rachel observed, noting the abandoned coffee cups and pages of notes scattered around the suite. "Anything I should know before we head in?" I briefed her on the attempted server breach and several other developments. Andrew had called 17 times and left 8 increasingly desperate voicemails. Theodore Mitchell had emailed a formal acquisition offer directly to Horizon's board members, bypassing me entirely. And my executive assistant had reported Mitchell Industries representatives arriving unannounced at our offices the previous evening, demanding access to financial records. "They're escalating rapidly," Rachel noted, her expression grim. "The public confrontation last night was just the opening move. They underestimated how prepared we'd be," I replied, gathering my notes. "That's an advantage we need to maintain." We took Rachel's car to Horizon's offices in Cambridge's technology corridor. The building, a converted textile factory with exposed brick and industrial windows, had always filled me with pride. Today, it felt like a fortress we needed to defend. Horizon's senior leadership team was already assembled in the main conference room when we arrived. Emma Chen, our brilliant CTO, Darius Washington, Chief Financial Officer, Maya Patel, Head of Product Development, and Jackson Torres, our recently hired Chief Operating Officer. All looked alert despite the early hour and unusual circumstances. "Thank you all for coming in so early," I began, closing the conference room door. "As you've likely gathered, we're facing a situation that requires immediate action." Over the next 20 minutes, I outlined the facts without emotional coloring. Mitchell Industries' increasingly aggressive acquisition attempts, The pressure, tactics they'd employed, the previous night's server breach attempt, and the unauthorized communication to our board. Mitchell Industries isn't just interested in a business transaction, I explained. They want our proprietary algorithms and client relationships, and they're willing to use questionable tactics to acquire them. Darius, ever the pragmatic CFO, asked the obvious question. Their offer is substantially above market value. Wouldn't it be in the shareholders' interest to at least consider it? Rachel stepped forward then, distributing folders to each executive. The financial terms are deliberately misleading. Our analysis indicates that nearly 40% of the proposed compensation is tied to earn-out provisions that Mitchell Industries could easily manipulate to minimize actual payout. Maya, who had worked at a Mitchell Industries subsidiary before joining Horizon, nodded grimly. That's consistent with their acquisition playbook. They offer stunning headlines but structure deals to reclaim value after closing. There's also the human cost to consider, Jackson added, reviewing the documents. Their integration plan would eliminate nearly 60% of our current positions. They're not acquiring Horizon as a going concern. They're harvesting our technology and client relationships. The discussion continued, focused and professional. These were some of the smartest people I knew, analyzing the situation from every angle. When the board members began arriving at 8 a.m., the leadership team had already aligned on our recommended response. The Horizon Solutions Board consisted of 7 members. Myself, Emma as a founding team member, 2 investor representatives, and 3 independent directors with industry expertise. Theodore's email had clearly influenced them. I could see the eyes see. Concern and confusion on their faces as they took their seats. Victor Jameson, our lead independent director and a retired tech executive, spoke first after I completed my presentation. Olivia, while I appreciate your concerns about Mitchell Industries, tactics, we have a fiduciary duty to consider any legitimate acquisition offer. $90 million is a significant premium over our last valuation. I understand that perspective, Victor, I replied evenly. But as Rachel has outlined, the actual guaranteed consideration is substantially lower. Furthermore, the conference room door swung open, interrupting our discussion. Andrew stood in the doorway, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Behind him loomed Theodore Mitchell and 2 men I recognized as Mitchell Industries' General Counsel and Chief Financial Officer. I apologize for the interruption, Andrew said, his voice carrying the polished confidence that had once attracted me. But given the circumstances and our significant interest in Horizon Solutions, we felt it was appropriate to join this discussion. This is a private board meeting, Rachel interjected sharply. You were not invited, nor do you have any standing to attend. Theodore stepped forward, his silver hair catching the morning light, his bespoke suit armor-like in its perfection. As the authorized representative of a party making a formal acquisition offer, we have every right to present our proposal directly to the board. Actually, you don't, Rachel countered, removing a document from her portfolio. Horizon's bylaws specifically prohibit uninvited third parties from attending board meetings, regardless of pending offers or proposals. The Mitchell contingent faltered momentarily, clearly unprepared for such immediate legal pushback. I used the opening to take control of the situation. Andrew, Theodore, this is inappropriate and unprofessional, I said, my voice level but firm. If you'd like to schedule a proper meeting through the appropriate channels, our team will consider it. But this intrusion demonstrates exactly the kind of tactics that concern us about Mitchell Industries as a potential partner. Victor and the other board members were watching the exchange with increasing discomfort. The power dynamics in the room were shifting rapidly as the Mitchells' aggressive approach backfired in real time. Theodore's expression hardened. Olivia, I understand you're upset about last night's unfortunate exchange, but business decisions shouldn't be clouded by personal emotions. This isn't about last night, I replied. though the reference to Andrew's public insult sent a fresh wave of anger through me. This is about a pattern of behavior that raises serious questions about Mitchell Industries' business ethics and intentions toward Horizon. Andrew stepped forward, his expression softening into the charming, reasonable facade I'd once found. So appealing. The board deserves to hear both sides, Olivia. They should understand the resources and opportunities we're offering, the stability, the security. His emphasis on the last word carried a subtle threat that wasn't lost on me, or on Emma, whose eyes narrowed at the implication. Security? Emma repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Like the security breach attempted against our servers at 2:43 this morning, the one that originated from an IP address block registered to Mitchell Industries? Theodore's confident expression faltered for a microsecond before he recovered. That's a serious and unfounded accusation. It's neither serious nor unfounded, Emma responded, sliding a tablet toward the center of the conference table. It's factual and documented. Our security systems not only blocked the intrusion attempt, but traced its origin and captured the attack methodology. Would you like me to display the logs for everyone to review? The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Board members who had been uncertain now looked alarmed. The Mitchell Industries CFO whispered something urgently to Theodore, who waved him off impatiently. If there was any access attempt, and I'm not conceding there was, it would have been routine due diligence, Theodore stated dismissively. Standard practice in acquisition scenarios. Unauthorized penetration testing of a target company's servers without consent isn't due diligence, Rachel countered. It's potentially criminal unauthorized access under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I watched as the Mitchell facade of reasonable business people making a generous offer began to crumble, revealing the predatory reality beneath. This was the moment to press our advantage. Gentlemen, I addressed the board, deliberately turning away from the Mitchell contingent. In light of these developments, I recommend we formally reject Mitchell Industries' acquisition offer and instruct our legal team to draft a cease and desist letter regarding their unauthorized access attempts and harassment of our staff. Victor Jameson, who had initially seemed most receptive to the Mitchell offer, now looked deeply troubled. These are serious allegations, if documented as Ms. Chen suggests. They are, Emma confirmed, pulling up security logs on the main conference room display. Complete with timestamps, access patterns, and digital signatures consistent with Mitchell Industries' known network configurations. Theodore's face had flushed an angry red, but Andrew looked oddly deflated, as if just realizing how thoroughly their plan was unraveling. This is a mistake, Theodore said, his voice losing its practiced smoothness. Mitchell Industries' offer represents the best opportunity Horizon will ever receive. Rejecting it would be irresponsible to your shareholders and employees. I believe our shareholders and employees prefer a company that isn't compromised by unethical actors, I replied evenly. Now, unless you have something productive to add, I'll have security escort you from our offices. For a tense moment, I thought Theodore might actually refuse to leave. His hands clenched at his sides, and the vein at his temple pulsed visibly. Then, with visible effort, he reasserted his public persona. We'll withdraw for now, he said with artificial graciousness. But this discussion isn't over, Olivia. The offer remains open until close of business Friday. I suggest you reconsider your position before then. Andrew hadn't spoken during this exchange. His eyes were fixed on me, with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Anger, certainly, but also something that might have been confusion or even hurt. Olivia, he said quietly as the other Mitchell representatives moved toward the door. We need to talk, privately. I have nothing to say to you that can't be said in front of my board and team, I replied, the memory of his public humiliation still raw. You made your position perfectly clear last night. His jaw tightened. This isn't finished. On that, we agree, I said coldly. It's just beginning. After the Mitchell contingent departed, escorted by Horizon's security team, the board meeting resumed in an atmosphere of stunned clarity. The Mitchell Industries intrusion had accomplished what my warnings alone might not have: concrete demonstration of their aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. "I believe we've seen enough to make an informed decision," Victor said after reviewing the security breach evidence and the misleading terms of the Mitchell offer. "Does anyone object to formally rejecting the acquisition proposal and authorizing legal action regarding the unauthorized system access?" The vote was unanimous. By 9:30 a.m., the board had not only rejected the Mitchell offer, but approved a series of protective measures Rachel and I had prepared. Additional security funding, acceleration of our pending patent applications, and exploration of strategic partnerships that could provide further insulation from hostile acquisition attempts. As the board members filed out, Victor paused beside me. "I owe you an apology, Olivia. I was too quick to see the dollar signs and not the warning signs." "You were doing your job, considering all options," I replied. "That's what good board members do." "Still," he said, "I've been in this industry long enough to recognize predatory behavior. The Mitchells aren't just aggressive business people, they're vindictive. Be careful." After the board departed, I gathered with my executive team to implement our defensive strategy. Tasks were assigned, communications prepared, and contingency plans reviewed. Throughout the intense morning, I maintained the composed, strategic leader persona that my team needed to see. It wasn't until I stepped into my private office around noon that I allowed myself a moment to process the personal dimensions of the crisis. On my desk sat a framed photo from my wedding day, Andrew and I laughing together, looking toward a future that now lay in ruins. Rachel knocked softly before entering. "Security team reports Mitchell Industries representatives have left the premises, but they've stationed what appears to be private security across the street. They're monitoring our building." I nodded, unsurprised. Intimidation tactics, predictable, but ineffective. "There's something else," Rachel said, closing the door behind her. "An email just came through from Andrew's personal account to yours. Our IT team flagged it in the monitoring system we established." She handed me her tablet. The message was brief. "Olivia, what happened at the board meeting wasn't what we planned. Things have escalated beyond what I intended or approved. We need to talk. Just you and me. No lawyers, no family. Meet me at Riverside Park at 2 p.m. by our SIAI. Bench. I'll come alone. There are things you don't understand about this situation. Please give me a chance to explain before this becomes something neither of us can control." Our bench referred to a specific spot along the Charles River where we'd often met during our early relationship, a private place away from the Mitchell world where we could simply be ourselves. "It's a trap," Rachel said flatly. "They failed with the direct approach, so now they're trying to isolate you for emotional manipulation." Logically, I knew she was probably right. And yet, something in the phrasing, the reference to our private meeting spot, made me wonder if Andrew was genuinely trying to reach out beyond his father's influence. "I'm not suggesting you meet him alone," Rachel continued, misreading my silence as consideration. "But if you want to hear what he has to say, we can arrange a secure meeting with proper protections." I shook my head, setting the tablet down. "No meeting, not yet. He made his choice last night when he publicly humiliated me to pressure me into surrendering my company. Now he can face the consequences of that choice." The words came out stronger than I felt them. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and manipulation, part of me still wanted to believe there was something salvageable in what Andrew and I had shared. But that part was being rapidly overwhelmed by the evidence of his true priorities. "What's our next move?" Rachel asked, returning to practical matters. "We accelerate everything," I replied, pushing personal feelings aside to focus on the business imperatives. Product development, client outreach, strategic partnerships. The Mitchells aren't going to back off. They'll just change tactics. We need to fortify Horizon against whatever comes next. Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression uncharacteristically concerned. "We've got another problem. Mitchell Industries just issued a press release announcing their strategic investment discussions with Horizon Solutions, complete with quotes attributed to unnamed board members expressing enthusiasm about the potential partnership. They're trying to create market perception of a done deal," Rachel said, immediately grasping the strategy. "Make your clients, investors, and employees believe acquisition is inevitable." I felt a surge of cold anger at the calculated deception. This wasn't just business anymore. It was psychological warfare designed to destabilize Horizon from multiple angles simultaneously. "Draft our counterstatement," I instructed Emma. "Clear, factual, unambiguous. Horizon Solutions is not for sale, has rejected Mitchell Industries' unsolicited offer, and views their unauthorized press release as a manipulative market tactic." "Already working on it," Emma confirmed. "Also, Jackson has assembled the client relations team to begin proactive outreach to our key accounts, reassuring them about our independent status and commitment to service continuity." As Emma departed, to coordinate our response, my phone rang with Andrew's number for the 18th time that day. I silenced it without answering. "You'll have to talk to him eventually," Rachel observed, "both as your husband and as a Mitchell Industries executive." "I know," I acknowledged, "but not until I'm ready, not until it's on my terms, and certainly not until we've secured Horizon against their immediate threats." My phone immediately rang again. Not Andrew this time, but a number I didn't recognize. When it rang a third, "Time in rapid succession," I answered cautiously. "Olivia Mitchell?" an unfamiliar female voice asked. "This is Olivia Reed," I corrected automatically, having never adopted Andrew's surname professionally. "Ms. Reed, I'm Vanessa Winters with the Boston Business Journal. We're preparing a story about Mitchell Industries' acquisition of Horizon Solutions and would like your comment on the transition and your future role." The Mitchell's press strategy was moving faster than I'd anticipated, already reaching media outlets with their fabricated narrative. "Ms. Winters, you've been misinformed," I replied, my voice steady despite my rising anger. "There is no acquisition of Horizon Solutions by Mitchell Industries. We received an unsolicited offer which our board has unanimously rejected. I'd be happy to have our communications team send you our official statement." There was a pause on the other end. "That's interesting. We received a detailed press packet from Mitchell Industries indicating the deal was essentially complete pending final paperwork." "They lied," I said simply. "And I suggest your journal consider the journalistic ethics of publishing unverified claims about a private company based solely on a potential acquirer's press release." After providing the reporter with our communications director's contact information, I ended the call and immediately contacted our investor relations team to prepare for similar inquiries. Rachel watched me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're holding up remarkably well under the circumstances." "I don't have the luxury of falling apart," I replied, the weariness I'd been suppressing finally seeping into my voice. "Too many people depend on me. Our employees, our clients, our investors. I can process the personal betrayal later." My phone lit up with a text notification, not from Andrew this time, but from Patricia Mitchell. "Olivia, dear, this unfortunate situation has gone far enough. Join us for tea at the house at 4 p.m. We can resolve this like a family before reputations are needlessly damaged." Patricia. The thinly veiled threat wasn't lost on me. The Mitchells were escalating on multiple fronts simultaneously: legal pressure, media manipulation, market confusion, and now personal appeals coupled with reputation threats. "They're getting desperate," Rachel observed, reading the message over my shoulder. "That's good. Desperate opponents make mistakes, but it also makes them more dangerous." She was right, of course. The Mitchells weren't accustomed to resistance, especially not effective resistance. Their usual tactics of corporate pressure and social intimidation were failing against our preparations, and that would likely drive them toward increasingly extreme measures. We need to be ready for whatever comes next, I said, standing up and smoothing my suit jacket with a determination I was beginning to genuinely feel. Because one thing is absolutely certain, the Mitchells aren't finished with us yet. As if on cue, Emma reappeared at my office door, her expression grim. You were right. They're not backing down. Mitchell Industries just filed for an emergency injunction claiming your algorithm is based on proprietary technology you allegedly had access to through your relationship with Andrew. The absurdity of the claim would have been laughable if it weren't so potentially damaging. My algorithm had been developed years before I even met Andrew, with documented development history and independent verification. They're trying to freeze our operations while this wins through the courts, Rachel said, immediately grasping the strategy. Typical corporate harassment tactic. Tie the target up in expensive legal proceedings until they're forced to settle. I met Emma's concerned gaze with newfound resolve. Activate the Phoenix Protocol. Emma's eyes widened. Are you sure? That's our nuclear option. I'm sure, I replied, my decision crystallizing in the face of the Mitchells' scorched earth approach. They want a war? Let's show them exactly who they're fighting. The Phoenix Protocol, named for the mythical bird that rises from its own ashes, was our most extreme contingency plan, developed but never expected to be needed. Its implementation would fundamentally transform Horizon's structure and operations in ways that would make it virtually acquisition-proof. As Emma hurried out to initiate the protocol, I turned back to Rachel. Call the hotel. Extend my reservation for the foreseeable future. Then contact your family law colleagues. I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Boston. The personal and professional dimensions of the crisis had become inseparable. If I was going to fight for Horizon's future, I needed to sever the connection that had become the Mitchells' primary avenue of attack. Are you certain? Rachel asked quietly. Once that process begins, I'm certain. I cut her off, my voice steadier than I felt. Last night at the family party, when Andrew called me stupid for refusing to surrender my company, he didn't just insult me. He showed me exactly where his true loyalties lie. Now I'm showing him mine. The Phoenix Protocol moved with the precision of a military operation. By late afternoon, Horizon's key systems had been migrated to secure backup servers untraceable to our primary infrastructure. Core intellectual property had been transferred to a specially created trust with ironclad protections, and our most sensitive client data had been secured behind additional encryption layers accessible only through biometrically authenticated keys held by myself and Emma. Transfer complete, Emma reported, looking up from her multiple screens. Mitchell Industries can file all the injunctions they want, but they can't freeze what they can't find. The tech team's workspace hummed with focused activity. What had begun as a normal workday had transformed into a coordinated defense against corporate predation. The tension was palpable, but so was the sense of unified purpose. These weren't just employees protecting a company, they were defenders safeguarding something they'd helped build. Status update on client communications? I asked Jackson Torres, who had been coordinating our outreach efforts. 97% of Tier 1 clients contacted, he reported. 84% of Tier 2. The response has been overwhelmingly supportive. Most had already received Mitchell Industries' misleading press release and appreciated our transparency. I nodded, grateful for Jackson's efficiency. A former military logistics officer before entering the tech sector, he brought a calm, methodical approach to crisis management that complemented Emma's technical brilliance. And the counterstatement? I asked Maya, who had taken point on our public relations response. Released to all major business publications and tech industry outlets, she confirmed. Boston Business Journal has already updated their story to include our categorical denial of Mitchell Industries' claims. TechWire is running a feature on corporate acquisition tactics, when press releases get ahead of reality. The media counteroffensive was crucial. The Mitchells had attempted to create a narrative of inevitable acquisition, hoping to generate enough market momentum that resistance would become futile. By aggressively challenging their false claims, we were not only correcting the record, but demonstrating that Horizon would not be bullied into submission. Rachel had spent the afternoon coordinating with outside counsel to prepare for Mitchell Industries' legal maneuvers. She entered the workspace looking grimly satisfied. Judge Monroe denied their emergency injunction request, she announced, found their evidence speculative at best, and criticized their attorneys for filing without proper foundation. They can still pursue the claim through normal channels, but they won't get the immediate freeze on operations they wanted. It was our first clear victory in what was shaping up to be a protracted battle, but I knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The Mitchells hadn't reached their position by accepting defeat easily. They'll try something else, I warned. This was just their opening legal gambit. Agreed, Rachel said, which is why we need to move forward with the second phase of Phoenix immediately. The second phase was even more radical than the first, a complete corporate restructuring that would make Horizon virtually acquisition-proof through a complex web of international holdings, employee ownership trusts, and dual-class stock structures. We had developed the plan hoping never to need it, but the Mitchells' aggressive moves had forced our hand. Do it, I authorized, and initiate the protective measures for our team members as well. Those protective measures included security, assessments for key personnel, temporary relocation options if needed, and comprehensive audits of their personal technology to prevent surveillance or intrusion. The Mitchells' willingness to attempt unauthorized access to Horizon servers suggested they might not hesitate to target individuals they perceived as vulnerable access points. As the Phoenix Protocol continued its rollout, I finally found a moment to retreat to my office for a breath between crises. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was beginning to ebb, leaving in its wake a bone-deep exhaustion and the personal pain I'd been pushing aside to focus on business imperatives. My phone, which had fallen silent after multiple ignored calls, buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. They're watching your hotel. Not safe to return. Alternative accommodations arranged. Car waiting at the service entrance. Password, Walden. The reference to Thoreau's Walden, the book Andrew had kept on his nightstand, identified the sender unmistakably as Megan, Andrew's cousin who had inadvertently revealed the Mitchells' premature acquisition announcement at the family party. Though part of the Mitchell clan, Megan had always been something of an outsider herself, pursuing a career in environmental science rather than joining the family business. I hesitated, uncertain whether to trust the warning. It could be a Mitchell trap designed to lure me into a vulnerable position. But if the Mitchells had indeed escalated to physical surveillance, returning to the Whitley could expose me to further pressure tactics or worse. A knock at my office door interrupted my deliberation. Darius entered, his normally unflappable CFO demeanor showing signs of strain. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Mitchell Industries just made an all-cash offer directly to our Series B investors to buy out their positions at a 40% premium. This was a particularly insidious move. While the investors couldn't force a sale of the company, their support was crucial for our ongoing operations and future funding rounds. If Mitchell Industries could pick them off individually, they could potentially gain enough leverage to force board changes or apply additional pressure from within our capital structure. "Have any accepted?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Not yet," Darius replied. "But Vista Capital is wavering. Their fund is under performance pressure this quarter, and a 40% instant return is hard to refuse." Vista Capital had led our Series B round, taking a 18% stake in Horizon. Losing them to the Mitchells would create a dangerous vulnerability in our ownership structure. "I need to call James Woodson at Vista immediately," I said, referring to the partner who had championed our funding, "and alert the other investors about what's happening." Darius nodded. "Already arranged a conference call for 4:30 p.m., but there's something else you should know." His expression told me this news might be even worse than the investor situation. Mitchell Industries has approached 3 of our senior engineers with job offers. Triple their current salaries, extensive signing bonuses, immediate vesting of options. This was an attack on our most valuable resource, our people. If the Mitchells couldn't acquire Horizon directly, they were attempting to extract its core, talent and presumably the knowledge those engineers carried about our proprietary systems. Who? I asked, though I could guess. Lee, Santiago, and Patel, Darius confirmed, naming 3 of our longest-tenured technical leads. All members of the original algorithm development team. Engineers who had been with us since near the beginning, who understood not just our current systems, but the foundational architecture of our technology. Their departure would be a significant blow, not fatal, but deeply damaging. Have they accepted? They came to me immediately, Darius said, a note of pride entering his voice. Said they wanted you to know about the offers but had no intention of accepting. Santiago actually used some colorful language about what Mitchell Industries could do with their money. Relief washed through me. The loyalty of our team was our greatest strength, something the Mitchells clearly didn't understand. They saw employees as assets to be acquired or poached, not as partners in a shared vision. Double their current compensation packages, I decided immediately. Not because they demanded it or would leave without it, but because their loyalty deserves recognition and accelerate their equity vesting schedules. Darius nodded approvingly. Already drafted the paperwork. Jackson and I figured you'd want to move quickly on this. As he left to prepare for the investor call, I returned to the mysterious text message. If the Mitchells were indeed escalating to physical surveillance, I needed to take the warning seriously, regardless of its source. I texted a reply. How do I know this isn't a trap? The response came almost immediately. The night Andrew proposed, you were wearing ripped jeans and had engine grease on your face from helping your mom fix her car. You made him wait until after you finished the timing belt. No one else knows that story. Mitt was true, an intimate detail from one of our most private moments, one I'd never shared publicly, and that Andrew would have only told someone he truly trusted. Megan might be Mitchell, but she was offering genuine help. I made a quick decision, texting Emma to implement Personal Security Protocol 3, a set of precautions we'd developed for executives traveling in high-risk situations. Then I responded to Megan. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you. The investor call would have to be handled remotely. I gathered essential items from my office, transferred critical files to a secure portable drive, and prepared to move to the alternative location. But before leaving, there was one more critical task to complete. The most sensitive part of the Phoenix Protocol, one I hadn't even shared with Rachel or Emma. From a hidden compartment in my desk drawer, I removed a small, external drive labeled simply Insurance. It contained information that would serve as both shield and sword in the conflict with the Mitchells, information I had spent months quietly accumulating, hoping never to need it. 5 months ago, when Theodore had first approached me about acquiring Horizon, and I'd sensed the unusual intensity behind his interest, I'd begun a quiet investigation into Mitchell Industries' business practices. It had started as simple due diligence, but had gradually expanded as troubling patterns emerged. Using Horizon's advanced data analytics capabilities, the same technologies we employed to optimize supply chains and identify inefficiencies, I had analyzed publicly available information about Mitchell Industries' acquisitions, contracts, and regulatory filings over the past decade. The patterns that emerged were subtle individually, but damning collectively. Systematic circumvention of antitrust regulations through shell companies, contract terms that effectively constituted market allocation agreements with nominal competitors, evidence of price fixing in government contracts. None of it was smoking gun proof of illegality, but collectively it painted a picture of a company operating at, and frequently beyond, the edges of legal business practices. Information that would be of great interest to regulatory agencies and business journalists if it ever came to light. I had compiled this intelligence not as a weapon, but as a deterrent, insurance against the possibility that the Mitchells might someday turn from aggressive suitors to vindictive enemies. Now that possibility has become reality. Securing the drive in my bag, I made my way to the service entrance where, according to Megan's text, a car would be waiting. The corridor was empty as I approached the door, but I remained alert. If the Mitchells were indeed conducting surveillance, they might have multiple observation points. A nondescript gray sedan idled near the service entrance, its driver a woman I didn't recognize. As I approached cautiously, she lowered her window. "Password?" she asked simply. "Walden," I replied. She nodded and unlocked the doors. "Ms. Mitchell instructed me to take you directly to the secure location. No stops." The drive took us through a circuitous route clearly designed to detect and evade potential followers. 30 minutes later, we arrived at a modernist home perched on a wooded hillside overlooking the western outskirts of Boston, Megan's personal residence, I realized, a property I'd heard mentioned but never visited. Megan met me at the door, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. Tall and athletic with the distinctive Mitchell blue eyes, she nevertheless lacked the polished perfection that characterized Andrew and his parents. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, ushering me inside. "I know how it must look. A Mitchell offering help when the family is actively trying to destroy you." The home's interior was warm and eclectic, filled with books and natural elements, i.e., stark contrast to the curated perfection of Theodore and Patricia's estate or the minimalist luxury of the penthouse I shared with Andrew. "Why are you helping me?" I asked directly, as she led me to a spacious living room overlooking a dense grove of maple trees. Megan's expression hardened. "Because what they're doing is wrong, and because it's not the first time." She gestured for me to sit, then disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of tea. "I've seen this pattern before. Uncle Theo identifying a company he wants, using every leverage point to pressure its owners into selling, destroying anyone who resists. But this time it's different. This time it's family, or at least someone who should have been treated as family." Her words confirmed what I'd already suspected, but hadn't fully acknowledged. This was indeed a familiar Mitchell playbook, not an exceptional response to my particular situation. "You said they're watching my hotel," I prompted. Megan nodded, grimly. 2 men in an SUV across the street since noon, another posing as a guest in the lobby. Uncle Theo's personal security team, not regular Mitchell Industries personnel. The escalation to physical surveillance represented a significant and troubling intensification. "How did you know?" "Because I've been watching them," Megan replied, simply. "After last night's party, I knew things would get ugly. I've seen Uncle Theo on the warpath before." She hesitated, then added, "And I owe you. What I said at the party, about the board announcement and press release, I had no idea they were moving without your consent. I thought it was a done deal, that you'd agreed to." "They count on people making that assumption," I said, taking a sip of the tea. "Creating the appearance of inevitability is part of their strategy." Megan studied me with frank curiosity. "You've prepared for this, haven't you? You anticipated what they would do." It was a perceptive observation, one that prompted me to reassess my initial wariness. Perhaps Megan could be more than just a temporary ally of convenience. "Yes," I admitted. "For months now, since Theodore first approached me about acquiring Horizon and wouldn't take no for an answer." "Smart," she said approvingly. "Most of their targets don't see the pattern until it's too late." I set down my mug, deciding to risk greater candor. "What do you know about Mitchell Industries' acquisition history, particularly companies that initially refused to sell?" Megan's expression turned grim. "More than Andrew thinks I do? More than I should, probably." She moved to a built-in bookshelf and withdrew what appeared to be a research binder. "I've been documenting the pattern for years. Not officially, just for my own understanding. It started when I was in graduate school and saw how they handled Northeastern Biotech. The name was familiar. A promising biotechnology startup that had imploded spectacularly amid accusations of patent infringement and financial irregularities. Mitchell Industries had acquired its assets for pennies on the dollar during the subsequent bankruptcy. They created those problems, Megan continued, opening the binder to reveal meticulously organized notes and clippings. Northeastern refused Uncle Theo's initial offer. 3 months later, they were facing anonymous patent challenges. Their primary funding round mysteriously collapsed, and 2 key executives were embroiled in personal scandals that later proved to be based on fabricated evidence. She turned pages, revealing case after case. Westlake Software, whose founder had a sudden IRS audit followed by criminal tax charges that were eventually dropped, but not before the company's value plummeted. Meridian Dynamics, which lost critical government contracts after security concerns were raised by unnamed sources. Rivertech Solutions, whose bank suddenly called in loans despite perfect payment history, citing changed risk assessments. This is their playbook, Megan explained, her voice tight with suppressed anger. When conventional pressure fails, they create crises that force the target company to either sell or collapse. And they're very, very good at ensuring nothing can be traced back to Mitchell Industries. The information confirmed my own research and worst fears, but seeing it documented so thoroughly, by Mitchell no less, was still shocking. Does Andrew know about this? I asked, needing to understand how deeply my husband was implicated in his family's tactics. Megan's hesitation told me everything before she even spoke. He knows. Maybe not every detail, but the general approach. He's been part of the strategic acquisitions team for years. He couldn't not know. The confirmation hit harder than I expected, despite having already suspected as much. Andrew hadn't just been following his father's orders under duress. He had been a knowing participant in a systematic pattern of corporate predation. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, gesturing to the binder. "You're essentially providing evidence against your own family." Megan closed the binder, her expression resolute. "Because someone needs to stop them. Because what they do destroys lives, not just businesses. And because I hoped, that you might be the one person positioned to actually do it." Her words hung in the air between us, laden with implications. I had prepared to defend Horizon against the Mitchells' tactics, but Megan was suggesting something more ambitious, not just resistance but active countermeasures. "I'm not sure what you're asking," I said carefully. "I'm not asking anything yet," she replied. "Just showing you that you're not alone in recognizing what the Mitchells are and how they operate, and letting you know that if you choose to fight back, really fight back, not just defend, you'll have at least one ally inside their camp." The offer was as unexpected as it was potentially valuable. A Mitchell family insider willing to provide information and support could dramatically change the dynamics of the conflict. "Why now?" I pressed, still wary of potential deception. "You've clearly known about these tactics for years. What makes this situation different?" Megan's expression softened slightly. "Because until you, it was always strangers. Faceless executives of companies I had no connection to. But I've known you for 5 years, Olivia. I've seen how genuinely you care about what you've built, how your employees respond to your leadership. You're not just another acquisition target. Were family." She hesitated, then added, "And because Andrew was different from you, better. For a while, I thought you might actually be changing the Mitchells from within, showing them another way to succeed without destroying others. When I saw him turn on you last night, calling you stupid in front of everyone, I knew Uncle Theo had won that battle, but maybe the war isn't over." Her words resonated with my own conflicted feelings about Andrew, the man I had fallen in love with versus the Mitchell scion who had publicly humiliated me. Had the good man been real, or merely a facade that had finally dropped when tested? What exactly are you offering? I asked, redirecting to practical matters. Information, Megan said simply. Advance warning of their moves when I can get it. Safe harbor when you need it. She tapped the binder. And this, documentation of their pattern of behavior that might be useful if things escalate further. It was a significant offer, one that could substantially enhance my ability to counter the Mitchells' tactics. But accepting would also mean trusting Megan completely, a risk given her family connections. Why should I trust you? I asked bluntly. How do I know this isn't an elaborate setup? That you're not feeding information back to Theodore? Megan's laugh held no humor. Uncle Theo barely acknowledges my existence except at mandatory family functions. I'm the embarrassment, the Mitchell who chose environmental science over corporate empire building. The one who uses the family money to fund conservation projects instead of political connections. She leaned forward, her expression intensely earnest. But I can prove my commitment. I have information about their next move against Horizon. Something planned for tomorrow that Andrew doesn't even know about yet. Theodore is keeping it compartmentalized because he suspects Andrew might be conflicted given his personal connection to you. The revelation that Theodore was now operating without fully informing Andrew suggested the situation was evolving in unexpected ways. It also implied a potential vulnerability in the Mitchell United Front. What's the planned move? I asked. Coordinated attack on multiple fronts, Megan explained. While their lawyers pursue the intellectual property claims as a distraction, they're planning to target your banking relationships. Someone at First National Bank, I don't know who, has agreed to call in Horizon's credit lines simultaneously, citing market uncertainty created by the acquisition rumors. They're also preparing to release anonymous information to tech blogs suggesting your newest software release contains critical security vulnerabilities. The strategy was diabolically effective. Financial pressure combined with market reputation. Damage, all while legal resources were tied up defending against spurious IP claims. A typical company would be overwhelmed fighting on so many fronts simultaneously. When exactly is this supposed to happen? I asked, already mentally formulating countermeasures. The bank calls start at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The security vulnerability story is scheduled to hit tech blogs by noon, Megan replied. They expect you'll be in crisis response mode by end of day, with your stock options devalued and clients getting nervous. That's when they'll have Andrew reach out, offering a friendly lifeline, a revised acquisition offer positioned as a rescue rather than a takeover. The detailed information carried the ring of truth and aligned with the patterns I'd already documented in my own research. It also provided actionable intelligence that could allow Horizon to prepare specific defenses against each threat vector. Thank you, I said, my caution giving way to genuine gratitude. This is invaluable. Megan nodded, her expression somber. Use it well. And remember, no one can know I'm helping you, not even your closest advisors. Uncle Theo has eyes and ears everywhere. The warning was prudent. Theodore Mitchell's influence extended throughout Boston's business community, and operational security would be essential to leveraging Megan's inside information effectively. I reached for my phone to relay a warning of the impending bank crisis, to Darius and the security vulnerability allegations to Emma, carefully omitting the source of the intelligence. As I composed the messages, Megan watched thoughtfully. You really were prepared for this, weren't you? The speed of your response to each attack, the contingency measures already in place. This isn't just reactive defense. I paused, considering how much to reveal. Megan had shared valuable intelligence and shown her commitment to opposing her family's tactics. Perhaps it was time for equivalent transparency from my side. Would you like to know what the Phoenix Protocol really is? I asked. Her eyes widened, slightly with interest. Your emergency response plan? Much more than that, I replied, setting down my phone. It's the culmination of 6 months of careful preparation. a comprehensive strategy designed specifically to counter the exact tactics Mitchell Industries is now employing. I opened my laptop and entered a complex authentication sequence, bringing up a secure dashboard labeled simply Phoenix. Phase 1, which we activated today, protects Horizon's core assets and intellectual property through distributed storage, legal shields, and ownership restructuring, I explained. Phase 2, which is now being implemented, makes Horizon virtually acquisition-proof through a complex web of international holdings and governance structures. Megan leaned closer, studying the dashboard with growing appreciation. This is extraordinary. You've essentially created a corporate immune system specifically designed to resist Mitchell acquisition tactics. Yes, I acknowledged, because I recognized the pattern months ago. Not as comprehensively as you've documented it, but enough to understand what we might eventually face. I hesitated, then revealed the final element. There's also a Phase 3, which we haven't yet activated. It's not defensive, but offensive. A carefully constructed counterattack designed to be deployed only if all other options fail. Megan's expression showed both surprise and respect. You're not just planning to survive their attack. You're prepared to fight back. If necessary, I confirmed. I built Horizon to create value, not to wage corporate warfare. But if the Mitchells force that choice, they'll discover I'm not the easy target they assumed. A notification appeared on my phone, an update from Emma confirming that our banking redundancies were being activated in response to my warning. We had established backup financing relationships months ago precisely to counter the risk of primary credit lines being unexpectedly withdrawn. They underestimated you, Megan observed. Badly. They see what they expect to see, I replied. A woman who married into their world, who should be grateful for their attention and compliant with their demands. They never bothered to look deeper. As night fell outside Megan's hillside home, I coordinated Horizon's preparations for the next day's multi-pronged Mitchell attack. Each threat Megan had revealed was being met with targeted countermeasures developed months in advance, refined now with the benefit of specific intelligence about timing and approach. For the first time since Andrew had called me stupid at the family party, I felt not just determined but genuinely confident. The Mitchells had initiated a battle they thought they would easily win, using tactics that had succeeded against countless previous targets. But they had never faced an opponent who had studied their playbook, anticipated their moves, and prepared specialized countermeasures for each phase of their assault. They didn't realize that their familiar pattern of corporate predation had become a vulnerability, a predictable sequence that could be defended against by someone who recognized it in advance. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of their attack, but thanks to Megan's warning and my months of preparation, Horizon would not merely endure, but counter each thrust with unexpected strength. The Mitchells were about to discover that their usual tactics wouldn't work against an adversary who had been quietly preparing for this confrontation long before they made their first move. Morning arrived with the quiet efficiency of Megan's modern coffee maker, automatically brewing at 5:30. I had slept fitfully on her guest room bed, my dreams haunted by fractured images of Andrew's face as he called me stupid, Theodore's calculating eyes, and the Mitchell estate looming like a fortress. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Systems secure, bank countermeasures in place, team assembled and briefed. Ready for 9 a.m. Horizon was prepared for Mitchell's coordinated attack, thanks to Megan's intelligence and our advanced planning. But as I sipped the strong black coffee and watched dawn break over the wooded hillside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something crucial. The Mitchells hadn't reached their position of power by being predictable or easily countered. If Theodore had kept parts of his plan hidden even from Andrew, what else might be concealed? What deeper strategy might lie beneath the surface attacks we'd identified? Megan appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in hiking gear despite the early hour. Morning routine, she explained, grabbing a travel mug. 5 miles on the conservation trail behind the property. Help me think. Want to join? The invitation was tempting. Physical exertion might clear my head, but the looming 9 a.m. deadline required my full attention. Rain check, I replied. I need to coordinate Horizon's response team before the banks start calling. She nodded understandingly. Use the office at the end of the hall. Secure fiber line, privacy screens on the windows. I've activated the signal jammers, so any surveillance equipment would be useless even if they somehow found this place. Her level of security preparation was impressive and slightly unnerving. You've done this before, I observed. Harbored fugitives from Mitchell Justice. A shadow crossed her face. Once. It didn't end well. She hesitated, then added, Be careful today, Olivia. When Uncle Theo's first wave fails, and it will, given your preparations, he'll escalate in ways you might not anticipate. Any insights on what form that escalation might take? Megan frowned thoughtfully. When normal tactics fail, he tends to make it personal. Find what you value most beyond the company and target that. The warning sent a chill through me. What? Did I value beyond Horizon? My independence, my reputation, the team I'd built, and once, not so long ago, Andrew. I'll be back around 9, Megan said, heading for the door. Text if anything changes. After she left, I settled into her well-appointed home office and connected to Horizon's secure network. The leadership team was already online, implementing final preparations for the Mitchells' expected 9 a.m. offensive. First National Bank's relationship manager called me directly last night, Darius reported. After hours, on my personal cell. Warned me off the record that pressure was coming from above to restrict our credit access. Did they specify the source of the pressure? Rachel asked. Not explicitly, but mentioned significant business relationships that transcend normal banking protocols. Clearly, Mitchell was influenced. I nodded. First National handled substantial Mitchell Industries accounts, and Theodore sat on their regional advisory board. His leverage there was considerable. Status on our financial contingencies? I asked. Backup funding secured through Boston Trust and Atlantic Commerce, Darius confirmed. Both Mitchell-free institutions. We've already transferred operational accounts and established new credit facilities. First National can pull their lines at 9 a.m. as planned, and our operations won't even hiccup. Similar preparations had been implemented across all vulnerable areas. Emma had prepared comprehensive security documentation to counter the impending vulnerability allegations. Jackson had briefed our client relations team with specific talking points addressing acquisition rumors. Maya had developed a media response strategy that would not just refute Mitchell claims, but reframe the narrative around Horizon's independence and innovation. By 8:45 a.m., we were as prepared as possible. The team maintained a tense virtual vigil, waiting for the first Mitchell salvo to be fired. At precisely 9:02 a.m., Darius received the expected call from First National Bank. He put it on speaker for the leadership team to hear. Mr. Washington, I'm calling regarding Horizon Solutions credit facilities. The bank representative began, her voice professionally neutral, but with an undercurrent of discomfort. Given certain market uncertainties that have recently come to our attention, the credit committee has determined it necessary to implement an immediate review of your current lines. What specific uncertainties are you referring to? Darius asked, following our prepared script. Well, there are reports of potential ownership changes, acquisition discussions, and some concern about management stability. Her rehearsed explanation faltered slightly as she continued. As a precautionary measure, we're temporarily freezing access to your revolving credit facility and requesting full collateral review for all outstanding loans. I see, Darius replied calmly. And this decision was made at what level within First National? The hesitation before her answer was telling. I'm not at liberty to discuss internal decision processes, Mr. Washington. I'm simply conveying the credit committee's determination. Of course, Darius said smoothly. Well, as it happens, Horizon Solutions anticipated this possibility. We've already transferred our primary banking relationships to other institutions and paid down all outstanding balances with First National as of 8:30 this morning. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. I wasn't aware of that, she finally managed. Yes, the transfers were just processed. You might want to check your system, Darius suggested helpfully. You'll find our accounts now. Shows 0 balances. We'll be closing them formally by the end of day. After the call ended, the leadership team exchanged looks of grim satisfaction. First blood to Horizon. 1 down, Emma observed. Next will be the security vulnerability, hit pieces, scheduled to start appearing around noon. But before we could discuss that impending attack, Maya's phone pinged with a news alert. Her expression darkened as she read it. They're moving faster than expected, she said. Boston Business Journal just published an article claiming sources close to Horizon Solutions report that several key engineers are leaving for Mitchell Industries, citing concerns about company stability. Jackson quickly checked internal communications channels. All engineering team leaders accounted for and at their posts. No resignations, no unusual activity. Pure fabrication, Emma said, anger evident in her voice. But effective. Clients will see it and worry about brain drain and product development continuity. The Mitchell playbook was unfolding as expected, just on an accelerated timeline. They were creating a crisis narrative from multiple angles simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm our ability to respond effectively. Implement Countermeasure Protocol 6, I directed. Maya, release the engineer loyalty statements we prepared. Emma, accelerate the security documentation, publish timeline. Jackson, activate client reassurance team calls now rather than waiting for the vulnerability claims. The team moved with practiced efficiency, executing the predetermined response plan. But something still bothered me. The attack seemed almost too predictable, following too closely the pattern Megan had outlined. Was Theodore Mitchell really so formulaic in his approach, or was there something we weren't seeing? My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would ignore unknown callers during a crisis, but something, instinct perhaps, prompted me to answer. Olivia Reed, I stated professionally. Ms. Reed, my name is Daniel Foster. I'm a journalist with the Technology Integrity Project. The voice was male, middle-aged, with the careful neutrality of an experienced reporter. I'm working on a story that involves Mitchell Industries' acquisition practices, and I understand your company is currently experiencing their attention. The Technology Integrity Project was a respected nonprofit investigative journalism organization focused on ethics and practices within the tech industry. Not mainstream media, but influential in technology circles and known for thorough research. Mr. Foster, this is an unexpected call, I replied cautiously. What exactly is your story about? Patterns, he said simply. Specifically, patterns of behavior by Mitchell Industries when targeting acquisitions that initially refuse their offers. Your situation appears to fit a concerning template we've documented across multiple cases. My pulse quickened. This aligned eerily with Megan's research and my own findings. What kind of patterns? Financial pressure through banking relationships, fabricated reputation attacks, targeted recruitment of key personnel, legal harassment through dubious IP claims, Foster enumerated, followed by what we call the rescue offer, a revised acquisition proposal presented as the only viable solution to problems they themselves created. It was the Mitchell playbook, described by an independent third party with no connection to Megan or myself. That does sound familiar, I acknowledged carefully. May I ask how you found me and why you're calling now? We've been investigating Mitchell Industries for 18 months, Foster explained. Documenting cases, interviewing targets, building a comprehensive picture of their tactics. When we saw the press release about their acquisition discussions with Horizon, followed by your firm denial, it fit the pattern. We accelerated our timeline because we believe you should know what you're facing. The revelation that an independent investigation had been tracking the same patterns we'd identified was both validating and concerning. If Foster's team had recognized the Mitchell tactics being deployed against Horizon, others might as well. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Foster? 2 things, he replied. First, that you're likely facing a coordinated campaign designed to devalue your company and force a sale on unfavorable terms. Second, we'd like to interview you as part of our investigative report, which will be published next week. Next week would be too late to help with our immediate crisis, but the existence of an independent investigation provided potential leverage and future options. I'd need to know more about your findings before considering an interview, I said, and I'm currently managing an active situation that requires my full attention. Understood, Foster replied. But there's something specific you should know. Immediately. Our investigation has uncovered unusual relationships between Mitchell Industries and the Federal Trade Commission officials who would normally review their acquisitions. We believe there may be improper influence affecting regulatory oversight. This was new information, a dimension we hadn't fully explored in our own research. If Mitchell Industries had compromised regulatory review processes, it would explain how they'd avoided antitrust scrutiny despite their aggressive acquisition history. That's a significant allegation, I observed. One we can document, Foster assured me. Which brings me to the real reason for my call. We have information suggesting Mitchell Industries is particularly interested in Horizon Solutions, not just for your technology, but because of what you know, or what they fear you might know about their business practices. A chill ran through me as pieces began clicking into place. Theodore's unusual persistence, the accelerated timeline, the involvement of his personal security team rather than just corporate resources. This wasn't just a standard acquisition play. There was something deeper driving his determination to absorb Horizon. What specifically do they think I know? I asked, my mind racing through possibilities. I was hoping you might tell me, Foster replied. Our sources indicate unusual concern at senior Mitchell levels about your data analytics capabilities and some specific supply chain clients you share with Mitchell subsidiaries. The supply chain clients? Of course. Horizon's algorithm analyzed transaction patterns across entire supply networks, identifying inefficiencies but also potentially revealing irregularities or coordinated behaviors that might otherwise remain hidden. Mr. Foster, I need to go, I said abruptly, a new understanding crystallizing. But I'm interested in continuing this conversation. Can I reach you at this number later today? After securing his contact information, I ended the call and immediately reached out to Emma. I need you to run a special analysis, I instructed when she answered. Pull all the data we have on supply chain patterns for clients that also work with Mitchell Industries subsidiaries. Look for anomalies that might indicate anti-competitive practices, price fixing, market allocation, bid rigging. That's not our normal analysis focus, Emma said, confusion evident in her voice. What exactly are we looking for? Patterns that shouldn't exist, I explained. Coordinated pricing across nominal competitors, suspicious consistencies in who wins which contracts, regional market divisions that appear too neat to be natural market forces. Understanding dawned in her voice. You think Horizon's algorithm might have inadvertently documented antitrust violations by Mitchell Industries? It's a theory, I admitted, but one that would explain why Theodore is so determined to acquire us rather than simply competing with or undermining us. If our data could potentially expose illegal business practices, he'd need to own and control that data, Emma finished. I'll run the analysis immediately. As I ended the call, my phone pinged with a text from Megan. Coming back early. Something's happened. Don't trust electronic communications. ETA 20 minutes. The warning heightened my already elevated concern. If Megan was breaking her routine and warning against digital communications, something significant must have developed. While waiting for her return, I reviewed the morning's developments. The Mitchell attack was proceeding as expected, but our countermeasures were holding. The financial pressure from First National had been neutralized. The false reports about engineer departures were being effectively countered with direct statements from the team members in question. We were prepared for the security vulnerability allegations with comprehensive documentation ready to deploy. Yet Foster's call had introduced a new dimension that changed my understanding of the conflict. If Horizon's data inadvertently contained evidence of Mitchell Industries' antitrust violations, Theodore's desperation to acquire us took on new meaning. This wasn't just a predatory acquisition. It was a cover-up. Megan arrived exactly 18 minutes after her text, slightly breathless and visibly concerned. "They've escalated faster than I expected," she said without preamble, closing the office door behind her. "Uncle Theo called an emergency session with his inner circle this morning at 5 a.m. Andrew was there." "What happened?" I asked, noting her unusual agitation. "The banking pressure failed," she confirmed. "They know you transferred accounts and secured alternative financing. The engineers' poaching attempts were rejected. Their initial tactics aren't working, and Uncle Theo is not handling it well." "How do you know this? I thought you were hiking." Megan gave a tight smile. "My conservation trail happens to run along the ridgeline above Uncle Theo's estate. The guest house where he holds sensitive meetings has excellent sightlines from certain positions. I've become quite skilled at reading lips through binoculars." The admission of surveillance was startling but explained her consistently accurate intelligence. "What exactly did you see?" Uncle Theo was furious about the failed banking maneuver. He demanded more aggressive action. There was an argument. Andrew pushed back on something, seemed genuinely upset. Megan's expression grew more troubled. Then Uncle Theo dismissed everyone except his head of security and Andrew. They moved to Theo's private study where I couldn't observe them. The timing aligned with the acceleration of media attacks against Horizon. The false reports about engineer departures had begun earlier than Megan's original intelligence had indicated. "There's something else," Megan continued. "On my way back, I spotted one of Uncle Theo's security team parked near your Cambridge apartment building. They're expanding their surveillance." This matched the pattern Foster had described, escalating pressure from multiple angles. But Megan's report about Andrew arguing with his father was new information. What had he objected to? And had he prevailed, or simply been overruled? I shared Foster's call with Megan, including the theory about Horizon's data potentially containing evidence of Mitchell Industries' antitrust violations. "That makes disturbing sense," she acknowledged. "It would explain Uncle Theo's unusual personal involvement and the accelerated timeline. Normally, he delegates acquisition pressure tactics to his team, but he's been driving this one directly." "If I'm right," I said, "then what's happening goes beyond aggressive business tactics into potentially criminal territory. They're not just trying to acquire Horizon, they're trying to bury evidence." Megan absorbed this with a thoughtful frown. "If that's true, then the risks are significantly higher than I realized. Uncle Theo protects the family reputation above all else. If he believes your company has documented evidence of illegal activities..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Theodore Mitchell's concern would extend beyond normal business considerations into existential threat territory, a much more dangerous scenario. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Emma. I put it on speaker with Megan's permission. "I ran that analysis," Emma reported without preamble. "You were right. The pattern is there, and it's not subtle once you know what to look for. Across 7 major industry verticals where we share clients with Mitchell subsidiaries, our algorithm has documented what appears to be coordinated pricing behavior among supposedly competing entities, geographic market allocation that defies normal competitive patterns, bid sequences that show statistical anomalies consistent with rigged systems. The confirmation sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Horizon's supply chain optimization algorithm, designed to identify inefficiencies and improve logistics, had inadvertently documented evidence of what appeared to be systematic antitrust violations. How definitive is the evidence? I asked. For someone who knows what they're looking at? Compelling, Emma replied. For regulatory authorities with subpoena power to gather additional corroborating evidence? Potentially devastating. Megan had gone pale. If Uncle Theo realizes the full extent of what your systems have documented, he'd see Horizon as an existential threat to Mitchell Industries, I finished. Not just a desirable acquisition, but a danger that must be contained at any cost. The stakes had just increased exponentially. This wasn't merely about protecting Horizon from aggressive acquisition tactics. It was about understanding that we held information that could potentially destroy the Mitchell empire if it reached regulatory authorities. We need to secure that data immediately, I told Emma. Isolate the analysis results and supporting datasets in our most protected systems. Limited access, maximum encryption, air-gapped storage for critical elements. Already? Implementing those protections, Emma confirmed. But Olivia, you should know, this kind of evidence makes us a target beyond normal business competition. If they can't buy us, they might try to destroy us entirely, I acknowledged. Or worse. After ending the call, Megan and I sat in silence, for a moment, processing the implications of what we'd discovered. This changes everything, she finally said. Uncle Theo isn't just trying to add another company to the Mitchell portfolio. He's trying to prevent a potential criminal investigation, which explains why he kept certain aspects of his plan hidden even from Andrew, I added. He might not have wanted to implicate his son directly in a cover-up. The thought that Theodore might be shielding Andrew from the worst aspects of this situation introduced a new complexity. Had Andrew known the full truth when he called me stupid at the family party? Or had he been operating with limited information, believing this was just another Mitchell acquisition? What will you do with this information? Megan asked quietly. It was the central question. The data Horizon had inadvertently collected represented both a powerful defensive weapon and a significant danger. Using it meant escalating the conflict to a level where normal business resolutions became impossible. Not using it meant fighting with one hand tied behind my back against an opponent who would stop at nothing. I need to consult with Rachel, I said finally. The legal implications are significant, and I need to understand exactly what Andrew knows about this situation. Megan nodded slowly. Be careful about direct contact with Andrew. Uncle Theo will be monitoring all his communications. I don't intend to contact him, I clarified. But I need to know his level of involvement to assess the personal dimensions of this situation correctly. The discovery of Mitchell Industries' apparent antitrust violations had shifted the landscape of the conflict dramatically. What had begun as a battle over Horizon's independence had evolved into something far more consequential, a potential corporate criminal investigation that could end with federal charges. The question now was not simply how to defend Horizon, but how to navigate a situation where the full truth could have devastating implications far beyond our corporate borders. The deeper truth had been uncovered, and it changed everything about the battle ahead. 6 months had passed since the night Andrew called me stupid at the Mitchell family party. 6 months of corporate warfare, personal reckonings, and fundamental transformations. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Solutions' new headquarters, watching the Boston skyline glitter in the late afternoon sun. The office hummed with purposeful activity behind me, engineers collaborating, account managers connecting with clients, the steady rhythm of a thriving company that had not merely survived an existential threat, but emerged stronger for having faced it. Final signatures came through, Emma announced, entering my office with a tablet in hand. Atlantic Shipping has officially migrated their entire logistics network to our platform. That makes 23 of the top 50 shipping companies now using Horizon's optimization algorithms. I accepted the tablet, scanning the contract details with satisfaction. Their CFO mentioned they were particularly impressed with our new regulatory compliance module. Emma's smile held a touch of irony. Funny how a tool designed to detect potential antitrust violations becomes a major selling point in today's regulatory environment. Funny indeed. What had begun as a defensive analysis to understand why the Mitchells were so desperate to acquire Horizon had evolved into one of our most valuable product features. The pattern recognition capabilities that had inadvertently documented Mitchell, industry's anti-competitive practices now helped other companies ensure their own operations remained within legal boundaries. The Commerce Department's advisory panel wants to consult with our development team, Emma continued. They're considering new regulatory frameworks for supply chain transparency and think our approach could inform national standards. This, too, was an unexpected outcome of our conflict with the Mitchells. When we had finally understood the full scope of what our data had revealed, we'd faced a momentous decision. Use the information purely as defensive leverage, or recognize its broader implications for market integrity. We had chosen the latter path, not out of vengeance but responsibility. The evidence of widespread anti-competitive practices across multiple industries demanded action beyond our immediate corporate interests. My intercom buzzed. "Ms. Reed, Mr. Foster is here for your 4 o'clock. Send him in, please." Daniel Foster had become a trusted ally in the months since his first unexpected call. His technology integrity project had published its groundbreaking investigation into Mitchell Industries' acquisition tactics, incorporating Horizon's experience as a case study in both predatory approaches and effective resistance strategies. Olivia. Foster greeted me warmly, his weathered journalist's face creased in a genuine smile. "Good to see you thriving. This view is considerably better than the borrowed office where we had our first in-person meeting." "Considerably better than Megan's safe house, too," I agreed, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area. Though, I remain grateful for her protection during those critical early days. Foster settled into a chair, placing a slim portfolio on the coffee table between us. "I've brought advance copies of our follow-up report. It will be published next week, but I wanted you to see it first." The portfolio contained a bound document titled, "After the Mitchell Method, Corporate Governance Reforms Following Systematic Anti-Competitive Practices." The cover featured a striking image of Mitchell Industries' former headquarters building, now emblazoned with the logo of the consortium that had acquired most of its legitimate assets following the antitrust settlement. "How does it feel?" Foster asked quietly, watching me examine the report. "Seeing the final chapter written on all this?" I considered the question carefully. "Complicated," I admitted. "There's vindication, certainly. Relief that the truth emerged, and accountability followed. But also," I hesitated, searching for the right words. "A certain sadness for what could have been different if the Mitchells had chosen another path." Foster nodded understanding. "And Andrew? Have you had any contact?" The question touched the still tender core of the personal dimensions of this saga. "Limited," I replied. "Through attorneys during the divorce proceedings. One brief, direct conversation after his father's sentencing. Nothing since he relocated to the West Coast." The unraveling of Mitchell Industries had affected different family members in dramatically different ways. Theodore was serving a 10-year sentence for antitrust violations, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. Patricia had avoided criminal charges through a cooperation agreement, but had lost her social standing and most of the family fortune to fines and settlements. Andrew had been cleared of direct involvement in the most serious violations, but had suffered the collapse of his career and family legacy. "Your testimony at the regulatory hearings was crucial," Foster noted. "Particularly your differentiation between the anti-competitive practices themselves and the aggressive tactics used to conceal them. It allowed the authorities to focus on the actual crimes rather than just the corporate bullying. That distinction had been important to me. While the Mitchell acquisition tactics had been unethical and harmful, the actual criminal violations were the price-fixing, market allocation, and bid-rigging schemes our algorithm had documented. Maintaining. That clarity had helped ensure the regulatory response addressed the true underlying issues, rather than merely punishing a family I had once been part of. A knock at the door preceded Maya's entrance. "Sorry to interrupt, but Jackson wanted me to let you know the partnership agreement with Regen Tech is ready for your review. They're particularly excited about the sustainability optimization components." After Maya departed, Foster raised an eyebrow. "Regen Tech? Isn't that Megan Mitchell's new venture?" I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. "She's done remarkable work building an environmental technology company from the ground up. No Mitchell money, no family connections, just her own expertise and vision." Megan's role as an inside source of intelligence during our conflict with the Mitchells had eventually become public during the regulatory investigations. She had faced ostracism from the remaining family loyalists, but had also found a kind of liberation in the family empire's collapse. Freed from the shadow of the Mitchell legacy, she had channeled her environmental science background into practical technologies for resource optimization. "And now, you're partnering with her," Foster observed. "Life takes unexpected turns." "The partnership makes perfect business sense," I replied. "Her sustainability algorithms complement our supply chain optimization tools. Together, they can help companies achieve both economic and environmental efficiency." Foster smiled. "The pragmatic justification doesn't negate the poetic justice, Olivia. The two family outsiders are building something positive from the ashes of the Mitchell empire." He wasn't wrong. Though neither Megan nor I framed our collaboration in those terms publicly, we both recognized the significance of former Mitchell disappointments, creating value where the family patriarchs had prioritized power and control. "Your team has remained remarkably stable through all this," Foster commented, glancing toward the open office area where Emma was engaged in animated discussion with several engineers. "No exodus despite the turbulence. We built something worth fighting for," I said simply. "Not just a successful company, but a culture based on innovation and integrity." When the crisis came, that foundation proved stronger than the Mitchell attacks. Indeed, Horizon's core team had not merely remained intact throughout the conflict, but had forged stronger bonds through the shared experience of defending what we'd built. Emma, Darius, Maya, Jackson, each had risen to the challenges presented by the Mitchell onslaught, demonstrating capabilities beyond their formal roles. "Speaking of fighting," Foster said, "I understand the final shareholder lawsuit against Mitchell Industries' former board was settled last week. That closes the last outstanding legal action, doesn't it?" "The last major one," I confirmed. "There are still some minor proceedings involving peripheral entities, but the central matters are resolved." The legal aftermath had been extensive. Beyond the criminal charges against Theodore and several key executives, Mitchell Industries had faced shareholder lawsuits, client claims, and regulatory penalties across multiple jurisdictions. The once mighty conglomerate had essentially ceased to exist, its legitimate business units sold off to competitors, its illicit practices exposed and dismantled. "In your Technology Integrity Project report," I said, redirecting the conversation, "you mentioned regulatory reforms inspired by this case. How are those progressing?" Foster brightened at the question. "Better than expected. The Commerce Department has drafted new transparency requirements for corporate acquisitions. The FTC has implemented enhanced scrutiny protocols for industries, with Mitchell-like concentration patterns. And 3 states have passed corporate governance reforms specifically addressing predatory acquisition tactics. This, perhaps, was the most meaningful outcome of the entire ordeal. Systemic changes that would help prevent similar abuses in the future. What had begun as one company's defense against predatory acquisition had catalyzed reforms benefiting the broader business ecosystem. "And what about you, Olivia?" Foster asked, his tone softening. Beyond the professional successes and vindication, how are you personally after all this? It was a question few people in my life asked directly. Most saw the external markers of success, Horizon's growth, our innovative new products, my professional recognition, and assumed personal well-being naturally followed. I'm rebuilding, I answered honestly. There's a certain disorientation that comes with having your personal and professional lives completely upended, even when the outcome is ultimately positive. I'm still processing what happened with Andrew, still reconciling the man I married with the person who called me stupid at that family party. Foster nodded sympathetically. Betrayal by someone you loved leaves deep marks, even when you've successfully defended against it. It wasn't just betrayal, I clarified, finding myself articulating thoughts I rarely voiced. It was the revelation that I never truly knew him, or perhaps that he never truly knew himself apart from his family's expectations. Either way, mourning that lost connection has been its own journey, separate from the business conflict. A notification appeared on my phone, a reminder of my evening commitment to mentor at a local women's entrepreneurship program. The monthly session had become a priority I refused to reschedule, even amid Horizon's rapid expansion. I should wrap up, Foster said, noting my glance at the phone. But before I go, the Technology Integrity Project is establishing a corporate ethics initiative based on lessons learned from the Mitchell case. We'd be honored if you'd consider joining our advisory board. The invitation was unexpected, but fitting. Send me the details, I replied. I'd be interested in learning more. After Foster departed, I took a moment alone at the windows, watching the lengthening shadows across the Boston skyline. 6 months ago, I had stood in the Mitchell estate garden, reeling from public humiliation and the sudden revelation of my husband's true priorities. Now I stood in the headquarters of a thriving, independent company that had not only survived a predatory attack, but had helped expose systematic corporate malfeasance. My desk phone buzzed. Ms. Reed, Rachel Sullivan is here. She says she has the documents you requested. Rachel entered carrying a leather portfolio similar to Foster's, but with quite different contents. As my attorney throughout the Mitchell conflict and subsequent divorce, she had navigated both corporate and personal legal complexities with unwavering support. It's official, she announced, placing the portfolio on my desk. The divorce is finalized, property settlement executed, and the last Mitchell trust connections untangled. You are officially and completely free of all Mitchell entanglements. The documents represented the final severance of my personal ties to the Mitchell world. The corporate battle had effectively ended months earlier with the regulatory interventions and criminal indictments. But the personal legal aftermath had continued through a protracted divorce process. How does it feel? Rachel asked, echoing Foster's earlier question. Like closing a chapter, I replied, running my fingers over the embossed portfolio. A necessary ending before the next beginning. Rachel smiled knowingly. Speaking of new beginnings, has Dr. Winters called again? I felt a faint warmth in my cheeks. Michael Winters, a biomedical researcher I'd met at a technology ethics conference 2 months ago, had recently suggested dinner, without the pretense of discussing algorithmic applications in medical research. We're having dinner tomorrow, I admitted. Just exploration, nothing serious yet. Good, Rachel said firmly. You deserve something positive on the personal front after everything you've navigated professionally. After reviewing the final divorce documents, Rachel departed, leaving me alone with the tangible proof that my Mitchell chapter was officially concluded. I should have felt only relief, but emotions are rarely so tidy. The documents represented not just freedom from a toxic situation, but also the definitive end of what had once been genuine love and partnership. My phone chimed with a calendar alert for the entrepreneurship mentoring session. As I gathered my things to leave, Emma appeared at my door. Heading out? She asked. Mentoring night, I confirmed. You're welcome to join if you're free. Emma smiled. Maybe next month. Tonight I'm testing the new predictive module with the Singapore dataset. Her dedication reminded me yet again why Horizon had survived and thrived. It wasn't just my preparation or strategic decisions. It was the collective commitment of people who believed in what we were building. Don't stay. Too late, I admonished gently. The algorithm will still be there tomorrow, says the woman who slept on her office couch for 3 straight nights during the Mitchell crisis, Emma retorted good-naturedly. I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her teasing. We've earned a little better work-life balance since then, I think. As I made my way through the open office space, team members called casual goodbyes or updated me on project statuses. The atmosphere was energetic but relaxed, a healthy organizational culture that had been strengthened rather than damaged by the crisis we'd weathered together. Outside, the early evening air carried the first hints of autumn crispness. My car waited in its reserved spot, but on impulse, I decided to walk the 6 blocks to the community center where the entrepreneurship program was held. The rhythmic movement and fresh air would help clear my mind for the mentoring session ahead. As I walked, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. When Andrew had called me stupid at the family party for refusing to transfer ownership of my company, he had intended to shame me into compliance. Instead, his public humiliation had catalyzed a sequence of events that not only preserved Horizon's independence, but exposed Mitchell Industries' systematic violations and ultimately led to its downfall. The irony wasn't lost on me. Theodore Mitchell had built his empire partly through intimidation and public humiliation of those who stood in his way. When Andrew employed that same tactic against me, he couldn't have anticipated it would ultimately dismantle everything the Yao Mitchells had built. Near the community center, I passed a small park where a group of young women sat in animated discussion around a portable whiteboard covered with what appeared to be a business model canvas. Their enthusiasm and collaborative energy reminded me of Horizon's early days, when possibilities seemed both endless and overwhelming. One woman noticed me and waved excitedly. "Ms. Reed, we were just talking about your panel at last month's session. Are you heading to the center now?" I joined them briefly, answering questions about startup financing and technology patent strategies. Their eager engagement was refreshing, uncomplicated by corporate power plays or hidden agendas, focused purely on building something valuable. "The most important advice I can offer," I told them before continuing to the center, "is to trust your instincts about your business, but also build systems that protect what you've created. Success attracts both supporters and predators. Know the difference." It was a lesson earned through difficult experience, but one I was now positioned to share with others navigating their own entrepreneurial journeys. At the community center, a diverse group of women entrepreneurs waited for the evening's mentoring session. As I prepared my materials, I noticed a new participant sitting slightly apart from the others, her expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty that struck a familiar chord. "First time here?" I asked, approaching her. She nodded. "I've been following your story since the Mitchell Industries situation became public. When I heard you were mentored at this program..." She hesitated, then continued with more confidence. "I'm facing pressure to sell my medical software startup to a larger competitor. They're not being as aggressive as the Mitchells were with you, but the tactics feel similar." And so it continued, the sharing of hard-won wisdom, the transformation of painful experience into useful guidance for others. What had begun as personal and corporate defense had evolved into something more meaningful, a model for resisting predatory business practices and building organizations based on innovation and integrity rather than intimidation and control. 6. Months ago, when Andrew called me stupid at the family party, he had sought to diminish me. Today, that moment of intended humiliation had been transformed into a catalyst for positive change extending far beyond my personal vindication or Horizon success. Sometimes, I told the group as our session began, what appears to be your most vulnerable moment can become the foundation for your greatest strength, if you refuse to accept the limitations others try to impose on you. The women nodded, some taking notes, others meeting my gaze with recognition of a shared understanding. We had all faced those who underestimated us, who expected compliance rather than resistance, who mistook our collaboration for weakness. As the session progressed into specific strategies and practical advice, I felt a deep sense of alignment between my personal journey and professional purpose. The Mitchell conflict had been painful and costly in many ways, but it had also clarified what mattered most, not just building a successful company, but creating something of lasting value that embodied principles worth defending. When Andrew called me stupid at that family party 6 months ago, he couldn't have known he was setting in motion a transformation that would ultimately benefit not just me and Horizon, but the broader business ecosystem. Sometimes the greatest vindication comes not from defeating those who sought to diminish you, but from creating something better in the space their absence leaves behind. That, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. One I would continue to share with others facing their own moments of challenge and choice in the complex intersection of business, power, and personal integrity. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.